Michael navigated the brightly lit aisles of the bustling local supermarket in Hialeah with a heavy, persistent sense of nostalgia that shadowed him every single time he visited this particular working-class neighborhood in the greater Miami area. This modest grocery store was the exact same place where his late mother used to take him when he was a small child, back when she would gently hold his tiny hand in hers and allow him to pick out a sweet vanilla popsicle if he managed to behave well throughout the shopping trip. Now, at 38 years of age, he returned to these familiar aisles, occasionally, just to feel that deep grounding connection with his humble past, desperately seeking comfort in the fading memory of those innocent days when everything in his world felt remarkably simpler and more genuine. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows over the vibrant Florida city, and Michael carried nothing but a simple carton of organic milk and a few fresh oranges in his hands, needing very little for his solitary existence. He truly did not need anything else, as he lived completely alone in a massive, breathtakingly silent mansion in the wealthy enclave of Coral Gables, where the lonely echo of his own heavy footsteps constantly resonated through the empty hallways and vacant, pristine guest rooms. However, on that particular Tuesday afternoon, while he stood quietly waiting in the lengthy checkout line, his predictable, meticulously organized, and ultimately hollow routine was about to be entirely shattered in a completely unexpected and deeply profound manner. Standing directly in front of him, a young woman was struggling visibly to balance a small toddler on her left hip, while using her right hand to nervously empty the very last scattered coins from her worn fabric purse onto the black conveyor belt. Michael could not help but notice her trembling fingers carefully observing the deeply anxious, frantic gestures with which she counted those few pieces of metal over and over again, her brow furrowed in silent desperation. The cashier, an older woman whose name tag read Brenda, waited with polite, sympathetic patience, but a long line of tired customers behind them was already beginning to murmur with noticeable frustration and a distinct lack of empathy. The little boy, who looked to be no more than 3 years old, stared with enormous, curious brown eyes at the colorful candies and snacks hanging right next to the register. Yet he did not ask for a single thing, choosing instead to remain completely silent. Michael captured that tiny, heartbreaking detail, instantly realizing with a heavy heart that the young child already understood the harsh, unforgiving reality of their situation, and knew that he was simply not supposed to ask for treats they could not afford. The young woman finally raised her exhausted eyes to the cashier, and her voice came out remarkably steady, despite the heavy blanket of shame she was desperately trying to conceal from the strangers crowding around her. "Exactly how much am I short for the groceries?" she asked, with a fragile, thin thread of lingering hope in her soft, melodious tone. The cashier quickly reviewed the final total on the glowing digital screen, her expression softening with genuine pity as she responded with gentle sympathy, informing her that she was exactly $50 short for the remaining essential items. The young woman's face contracted tightly for a brief, agonizing second, looking almost as if something incredibly fragile had just broken silently deep inside her chest, a quiet devastation that she fought valiantly to mask. She carefully picked up a large can of black beans, a heavy bag of white rice, and a loaf of bread, handing them back to the cashier with a trembling hand, while murmuring that she would not be taking those today. Then she took a deep, shaky breath, looked the cashier directly in the eyes, and spoke with a breathtaking level of dignity that struck Michael right through his chest like a sudden electrifying bolt of lightning. "I promise to pay you back when I can," she stated firmly, and it was neither a desperate plea for pity nor a pathetic excuse to escape the embarrassment of the moment. It was a solid, unwavering declaration of intentions, a profound promise made bearing the heavy weight of someone who still fully believed in the absolute value of her own word, even though the cruel world had clearly knocked her down 1,000 times before. Michael felt something powerful awaken deep within his soul, a dormant sense of profound empathy and fierce protectiveness that had been quietly sleeping inside his guarded heart for many long, lonely years. Without wasting a single second, overthinking the complex social situation, he boldly took a decisive step forward, placed his hand firmly on the cold counter, and pulled out his sleek leather wallet to intervene. "I will gladly pay for everything," he stated with absolute, unwavering calmness, smoothly sliding a crisp bill across the surface toward Brenda, without waiting for anyone's permission or approval. The young woman spun around to face him, absolutely astonished, her dark eyes wide with complete disbelief and mild alarm at the sudden unprompted intervention of this wealthy-looking stranger in a tailored suit. "No, sir, I absolutely cannot accept this immense generosity." She immediately began to protest, taking a cautious step back and clutching her child closer. "It is already completely paid for," Michael replied with a warm, tranquil smile, making sure to avoid any dramatic gestures or grand displays of superiority. It was merely a simple, quiet act of profound kindness, passing directly from one human being to another. The young woman stood completely paralyzed for a long, heavy moment, instinctively hugging her little boy, Gavin, much tighter against her chest, while the child looked at the tall stranger with innocent, wide-eyed curiosity. "I honestly do not know how to even begin thanking you for what you just did," she finally whispered, her gentle voice thickly choked by the overwhelming emotion she was desperately trying to hold back in public. Michael simply shook his head dismissively, refusing to accept any extravagant praise for an act he deemed basic human decency. "You do not need to thank me for anything at all. Just make sure to take very good care of your beautiful son," he said warmly, pointing toward the little boy, who was now offering a tiny, shy, gap-toothed smile. They both exited the sliding glass doors of the busy supermarket at nearly the exact same time, stepping out into the humid Miami heat, and Michael genuinely believed that this brief, touching encounter would be the absolute end of their story. He assumed it was just a small, fleeting gesture of goodwill that would soon be lost to the warm evening ocean winds, but fate clearly had entirely different, magnificent plans written for their intersecting lives. As Michael was steadily walking across the vast sun-baked asphalt parking lot toward his expensive silver truck, he suddenly heard a breathless, urgent voice calling out to him from behind. "Sir, please wait just a moment," she called out loudly, struggling significantly, as she carried both the heavy child and the bulky plastic grocery bags, practically stumbling over her own tired feet in her desperate rush to catch up to his long strides. Michael immediately stopped walking and turned around to see her finally reaching him, panting heavily, with her cheeks flushed bright red from the brief, frantic run and the lingering, painful embarrassment of her situation. "I am so incredibly sorry to bother you once again," she said, while struggling to catch her breath, her eyes darting nervously around the parking lot. "The truth is that I do not even have enough money left to pay for the city bus ride back to my home." Her dark eyes shimmered with unshed tears that she stubbornly refused to let fall fiercely, holding on to the last remaining shreds of her personal pride, despite the crushing weight of her immediate poverty. Michael observed her in complete respectful silence for a brief second, seeing not just a random woman in terrible distress, but a fierce, resilient human being fighting with all her might to keep her head held high against insurmountable odds. Little Gavin stared up at him with those large, trusting eyes, almost as if the innocent child inherently knew that this specific man possessed the necessary power and compassion to keep them safe from harm. Michael instantly understood with a clarity that surprised him that this particular Tuesday afternoon was permanently destined to alter the entire course of his predictable life forever. "You can get in. I will gladly give you a safe ride home." Michael offered, kindly, swiftly opening the heavy rear door of his pristine, air-conditioned vehicle. The woman hesitated for only a fraction of a second before accepting his generous offer, seemingly calculating in her exhausted mind whether she could truly trust this mysterious stranger who had just shown her far more compassion than she had received in many agonizing months. She climbed inside very carefully, gently settling little Gavin onto her lap, and safely arranging the plastic grocery bags right next to her on the luxurious leather seats, marveling silently at the cool air and immaculate interior. Michael smoothly started the powerful engine and patiently waited for her to provide the necessary directions to her residence, turning the radio down so they could speak comfortably. "I live over in a small neighborhood near the old Hialeah Community Center," she murmured softly, while looking down at her worn canvas shoes, acting almost as if she felt deeply ashamed to admit that she resided in one of the most modest working-class districts in the entire city. He nodded his head understandingly, without making any judgmental comments, smoothly shifting the heavy vehicle into gear, and merging expertly onto the busy, palm-lined urban streets of the sprawling metropolis. A comfortable, reflective silence filled the spacious interior of the truck during the first several miles, broken only by the quiet, rhythmic purring of the engine and the occasional soft, happy babbling from the little boy in the back seat. Michael kept his eyes focused entirely on the winding road ahead, while she stared blankly out the tinted passenger window, both of them completely lost in their own complex webs of personal thoughts and hidden sorrows. It was Michael who finally decided to gently break the lingering silence, wanting to ease the palpable tension filling the cool air of the cabin. "What is your wonderful son's name?" he asked, with genuine heartfelt curiosity, glancing back at her through the reflective surface of his rearview mirror with a kind, encouraging expression. She raised her tired gaze, looking mildly surprised by his sudden personal question, but grateful for the friendly distraction. "His name is Gavin," she responded with a tiny but deeply sincere smile, softly caressing the top of the boy's dark curly hair. "He just turned 3 years old last week, and he is my entire world. He is an exceptionally calm and well-behaved little boy." Michael complimented, sincerely navigating through a busy intersection as the Miami sky began to turn brilliant shades of pink and orange. He was so remarkably patient and quiet while waiting inside the chaotic supermarket, which is rare for children his age. She nodded her head enthusiastically, a bright spark of undeniable maternal pride flashing brilliantly in her dark eyes, temporarily erasing the exhaustion from her youthful face. "Yes, he truly is a wonderful child, sometimes almost too deeply understanding and good-natured for his young age, as if he knows we cannot afford tantrums." There was an underlying note of profound sadness hidden beneath her words, causing Michael to realize that she carried a heavy, unseen burden on her fragile shoulders. The little boy remained completely oblivious to the serious adult conversation hovering above him, happily playing with a worn-out plastic toy car that he had pulled out from his mother's faded jacket pocket. "And do you have any children of your own, sir?" she asked, with genuine timidity, attempting to politely maintain the pleasant flow of their conversation and show polite interest in her savior. That innocent, entirely well-meaning question struck Michael like an invisible, devastating punch directly to his stomach, instantly dragging up years of buried agony, but he miraculously managed to maintain his calm outer composure. "No, I do not have any children," he replied simply, offering absolutely no further details about his private life, and she immediately caught the subtle, painful shift in his tone, wisely deciding not to press the sensitive issue any further. The scenic drive continued steadily as they navigated away from the glittering downtown skyline and moved through the increasingly narrow and significantly more modest streets of the western side of the sprawling city. The massive gated mansions and wide manicured avenues of the wealthier districts slowly gave way to much simpler constructions, featuring brightly painted but peeling facades, chain-link fences, and vibrant sidewalks bursting with lively community energy. Michael noticed through the mirror that she was growing increasingly nervous the closer they got to her home, anxiously twisting her thin hands together over her lap, as if preparing for a difficult confession. "Is everything all right back there?" he inquired with a soft, comforting tone, pulling the car to a gentle stop at a red light and looking at her reflection. She took a remarkably deep breath, acting as though she were mentally preparing herself to make a very difficult, deeply personal confession to a complete stranger who had shown her unprecedented kindness. "Sir, I really need to thoroughly explain something to you about what happened today," she began, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of anxiety and fierce pride. "I absolutely do not want you to think for a single second that I am some irresponsible person who carelessly takes advantage of the kindness of good people." Michael continued to watch her attentively through the rearview mirror, offering her his complete and undivided attention as the traffic light turned green and he slowly accelerated. "I assure you, I do not think anything of the sort. You do not owe me any explanations," he stated firmly, hoping to ease her visible, heart-wrenching distress. She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of her faded purse, and bravely continued her painful explanation regardless of his reassurances. "The money that I originally had in my purse was my entire hard-earned salary for this past week. I currently work long hours cleaning houses for a very strict woman named Mrs. Higgins, and I just received my cash payment early this morning." The difficult words were now pouring out of her mouth much faster, as if she desperately needed to confess the heavy truth before she completely lost her nerve and succumbed to her embarrassment. "But, late last night, my sweet Gavin suddenly developed an extremely high fever, and during the earliest hours of the morning, I had no choice but to rush him to the emergency urgent care clinic. The attending doctor informed me that he was suffering from a severe throat infection that required immediate medication." Tears finally broke free from her determined restraint, rolling silently and continuously down her pale cheeks as she recalled the terrifying, helpless ordeal of watching her child suffer. The unexpected medical consultation and the necessary prescription antibiotics ended up costing me almost every single dollar that I had painstakingly earned cleaning floors all week. She sobbed openly now, no longer able to hide her despair. "I was only left with barely enough to buy a tiny amount of food for the week, but as you clearly saw at the register, even that small amount was simply not enough to survive." Her voice completely shattered on the very last word, leaving a heavy, sorrowful silence filling the truck's cabin. Michael felt his own chest tightening painfully, with every single word he absorbed, completely struck by the brutal unfairness of her daily existence. He, a man who had spent many long years comfortably surrounded by extravagant luxuries, high-yield investment portfolios, and endless financial security, had never once faced the agonizing, soul-crushing dilemma of having to choose between the essential health of a child and the basic groceries needed to survive the week. Without thinking, Michael dared to softly ask about the little boy's father, even though he truly feared the devastating answer he was about to receive. She let out a short, bitter laugh that lacked any real humor or joy. He completely walked away the exact second he found out that I was pregnant, coldly stating that he was not ready to be a father, and telling me that I had to figure everything out entirely on my own. Gavin, sensing his mother's profound sadness, reached up and gently wiped her wet cheek. "Do not cry, Mommy," the little boy said in his angelic voice, and those few simple words forcefully shattered the remaining icy walls surrounding Michael's heavily guarded heart. They finally arrived at a remarkably narrow street where the humble houses were squeezed tightly next to each other, displaying modest but fiercely proud and well-kept appearances, with small potted plants lining the concrete steps. "This is it, right here on the left," she indicated politely, pointing a trembling finger toward a tiny square concrete structure, painted in a heavily faded shade of ocean blue. Michael smoothly parked the heavy truck by the crumbling curb, and she carefully stepped down onto the sidewalk, securely carrying the young boy and grabbing the heavy plastic bags of groceries in her free hand. Right before closing the heavy passenger door, she turned completely around to face him, her tear-filled eyes suddenly blazing with an undeniable fierce determination that demanded absolute respect. "Sir, could you please give me your personal phone number? Or a business card?" she requested, with an astonishingly firm and steady voice, refusing to break eye contact. Michael looked back at her in complete surprise, not expecting this sudden bold demand from the weeping woman who had just confessed her absolute financial ruin. "The exact second that I receive my very next paycheck from Mrs. Higgins, I solemnly swear to God that I will return every single penny to you," she stated with absolute conviction that left absolutely no room for any argument or polite refusal. He slowly pulled an elegant, crisp business card from his leather wallet and gently handed it to her through the open window, his expression softening with deep admiration. "That is truly not necessary. Please focus on your son," he insisted with a warm, gentle tone, hoping she would simply accept the gift and move forward. However, she had already carefully tucked the small card into her pocket, treating it as if it were a priceless, irreplaceable treasure that held the key to her personal honor. "For my own peace of mind, it is absolutely necessary," she firmly replied, locking her dark eyes directly onto his once again. "My name is Samantha, and I want you to know that I always keep my promises, no matter how hard things get." After saying that, she turned around and walked bravely into her small blue house, with Gavin securely held in her loving arms. Michael remained sitting motionless inside his running vehicle for a long time, quietly watching the faded blue door click shut. And in that exact profound moment, he knew without a shadow of a doubt that Samantha had permanently left an indelible mark upon his weary soul. He finally drove back to his massive residence in Coral Gables, arriving just as the glowing sun completely disappeared behind the towering skyline of downtown Miami. The colossal, perfectly decorated house welcomed him back with the exact same oppressive silence as always, an echoing emptiness he usually tried to drown out with endless, meaningless corporate work and late-night conference calls. He casually dropped his heavy keys onto the cold marble entryway table and walked straight into the sprawling, spotless kitchen to brew a dark cup of expensive coffee that he knew he would never actually finish drinking. Tonight was remarkably different from all the other lonely nights. His busy mind simply could not stop replaying the striking image of Samantha's determined eyes and the dignified way she had fiercely defended her honor in the face of absolute despair. He vividly remembered the tiny warm hands of little Gavin gently touching his mother's tear-stained cheek in a desperate attempt to offer innocent comfort, a gesture so pure it physically ached to recall. Michael fruitlessly tried to distract himself by turning on the enormous television and aimlessly scrolling through countless boring business emails on his tablet, but absolutely nothing worked to erase them from his thoughts. He heavily collapsed onto the massive leather sofa in his expansive living room, letting out a long, shuddering sigh as he tried to understand why this random, struggling single mother had affected his guarded emotions so profoundly. He stood up, slowly walking toward the large glass window overlooking his perfectly manicured but entirely unused green backyard, the sparkling swimming pool reflecting the cold moonlight. He closed his tired eyes, and inevitably, the dark ghosts of his painful past began to aggressively emerge from the deeply hidden corners of his guarded memory, refusing to remain buried. He knew exactly why this mother and son had moved him so powerfully. 7 long years ago, Michael had been happily married to a beautiful, fiercely ambitious woman named Rebecca, whom he had met at an elite real estate conference. Their whirlwind romance had been intense and full of glorious future plans, culminating in a lavish, elegant wedding, surrounded by hundreds of cheering friends believing their grand love was destined to last for eternity. For the first 2 years, their marriage seemed absolutely flawless, filled with exotic travels to Europe, and the endless comforts his massive fortune easily provided. But everything changed when Rebecca constantly started expressing her intense desire to become a mother. Michael deeply wanted children too, dreaming of a house filled with laughter. But after a full year of painful, unsuccessful attempts, they visited a top fertility specialist in the city. The doctor delivered the life-shattering news that Michael suffered from a rare medical condition resulting in a 0 sperm count, making biological fatherhood permanently impossible for him. Rebecca's eyes instantly filled with a freezing, resentful disappointment that destroyed him. She emotionally abandoned him over the next few agonizing months, eventually leaving him divorce papers on the dining table, utterly crushing his dreams of ever having a loving family. The following weeks passed by at an agonizingly slow, yet strangely rapid pace, as Michael desperately tried to maintain his normal, highly demanding corporate routine in the glittering high-rises of Miami. He attended endless board meetings, closely supervised his lucrative real estate investments, and ate solitary, flavorless lunches in outrageously expensive restaurants where the service was absolutely impeccable. But the human companionship was entirely non-existent. Despite his best efforts to focus solely on his spreadsheets and profit margins, Samantha's unforgettable face constantly flashed through his mind at the most random, unexpected moments of his busy day. Whenever he signed a massive contract, he vividly remembered her thin, trembling hands counting those dull metal coins. The stark contrast between his absurd wealth and her desperate struggle haunted his every waking moment. His longtime friend and trusted business partner David quickly noticed his highly uncharacteristic distraction during a crucial luncheon, asking him what on earth had his head so high up in the clouds lately. Michael merely offered a vague, noncommittal smile, and quickly changed the subject, knowing it was utterly impossible to explain how a brief encounter with a struggling cleaner in Hialeah had completely turned his internal world entirely upside down. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, his sleek mobile phone suddenly buzzed on his large oak desk, displaying an entirely unknown local number flashing brightly on the digital screen. Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second, assuming it was just another annoying telemarketer or an overly eager real estate broker, but an inexplicable strong gut feeling urged him to answer the call immediately. "Hello, Michael speaking," he said with his usual crisp, professional tone, fully prepared to politely end the conversation, but the voice on the other end completely paralyzed him in his leather chair. "Mr. Michael, this is Samantha. We met exactly 3 weeks ago at the local supermarket near my house," she said, sounding slightly nervous, but incredibly determined and clear. Michael's heart instantly executed a massive, joyful leap inside his chest, and he immediately sat up straight, accidentally knocking a stack of important architectural blueprints completely onto the carpeted floor. "Samantha, of course, I remember you perfectly," he replied swiftly, desperately, trying to sound incredibly calm and collected, even though his pulse was racing wildly against his throat. "How have you been doing, and how is little Gavin feeling?" he asked eagerly, waiting through a brief, tense pause before she happily informed him that her son had completely recovered from his severe throat infection. That wonderful news brought Michael a wave of genuine, profound relief, making him realize just how heavily he had been worrying about a child he barely even knew. "I am actually calling you today because I finally received my full payment for this week's cleaning jobs from Mrs. Higgins." Samantha continued, her voice growing noticeably stronger and much more confident now that she was fulfilling her promise. "I have carefully saved up the exact amount of money you generously spent on us at the grocery store, and I am ready to return it to you right now, just as I swore I would." Michael closed his eyes tightly, deeply moved all over again by the unbreakable integrity and fierce, unyielding pride of this remarkable young woman facing such harsh circumstances. "Samantha, I promise you again that it is truly not necessary. Please use that money for Gavin." He attempted to argue gently, but she quickly interrupted him with unwavering, respectful politeness. "To me, it is absolutely essential, sir. My late mother taught me that promises must always be honored no matter what the cost, and I intend to keep mine," she declared with a proud dignity that Michael deeply respected. He realized instantly that refusing the money would painfully strip away the honor she fought so hard to maintain. So he gracefully conceded, asking her where she would like to meet to settle the debt. Samantha audibly sighed with relief, the tension leaving her voice, and politely suggested meeting at Nancy's Diner, a modest little neighborhood cafe located right around the corner from her blue house. They scheduled the meeting for 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday, and Michael arrived exactly 15 minutes early, his stomach tied in nervous knots, eager to finally see her face once again. The humble diner was exactly as she had described it, impeccably clean, featuring worn wooden tables, vinyl booths, and filled with the mouth-watering aroma of fresh Cuban coffee and hot cherry pie. Michael sat near the large front window, watching the diverse neighborhood go by, feeling a strange sense of belonging in this simple place that his luxurious country clubs utterly lacked. At exactly 5 minutes past the hour, Samantha walked through the tinkling glass door wearing a simple yet lovely navy blue cotton dress, her dark hair neatly pulled back into a practical ponytail, and an expression of proud determination shining brightly on her beautiful face. Michael stood up respectfully as she approached the table, their eyes meeting in a shared, joyful smile that completely banished any lingering awkwardness or societal barriers between them. She carefully pulled a sealed white paper envelope from her purse and slid it across the scratched wooden table, proudly declaring that she had counted the exact $50 3 separate times to ensure nothing was missing. Michael smoothly placed the envelope into his tailored jacket pocket, without even glancing inside, telling her that he never doubted her honesty for a single second. They then ordered 2 cups of rich coffee and a slice of pie to share, and what was supposed to be a brief transaction magically stretched into a deeply engaging conversation that lasted for over an hour. Samantha spoke passionately about her dreams for Gavin's future, her exhausting but honest work, and her determination to provide a safe, loving home despite the endless financial hurdles she faced daily. Michael listened with rapt attention completely mesmerized not just by her striking physical beauty, but by the incredible resilience and pure goodness radiating from her very soul. As he watched her eyes light up while talking about her son, Michael suddenly realized with absolute terrifying clarity that he was falling deeply and irrevocably in love with her. A few days after their wonderful, life-changing reunion at Nancy's diner, Michael confidently sent Samantha a polite text message, casually asking if she would allow him to take her and Gavin to Bayfront Park on the upcoming Sunday afternoon. He anxiously stared at his phone for nearly an entire hour, feeling like a nervous teenager, until she finally replied enthusiastically, accepting the invitation and noting that little Gavin had never visited that famous downtown park before. Sunday morning arrived with beautifully clear sunny skies and a gentle ocean breeze, and when Michael pulled his shiny truck up to their modest house, Gavin literally jumped up and down with uncontrollable, pure, childish excitement. The boy grabbed Michael's hand immediately, babbling endlessly about the boats and the water, and Michael felt a piece of his broken heart permanently heal right then and there. At the sprawling green park overlooking the sparkling Miami waterfront, Michael happily bought them sweet strawberry ice cream cones, and they spent hours strolling peacefully along the winding paths, watching the massive cruise ships sail gracefully out toward the open ocean. When they found a colorful, bustling playground, Gavin begged loudly to be pushed on the tall swings, and Michael happily obliged, listening to the boys' echoing musical laughter, while Samantha watched them from a nearby shaded bench with a breathtaking, radiant smile. She softly confessed to Michael that she rarely ever had the extra time or money to bring her son to such magical places, completely breaking Michael's heart with her raw, honest vulnerability. From that perfect Sunday onward, their weekend outings quickly transformed into a cherished, unbreakable tradition. As they enthusiastically visited the spectacular zoo and marveled at the interactive exhibits inside the Children's Museum, Michael also began showing up frequently at Nancy's diner during the regular work week, perfectly timing his visits to match the exact end of Samantha's exhausting cleaning shifts. He deliberately kept the massive scale of his extreme wealth completely hidden, parking his luxury sports cars at home and driving the unassuming truck, desperately wanting her to fall in love with the actual man he was, rather than the vast fortune he possessed. One beautiful breezy afternoon, while they were peacefully walking along the lively South Beach boardwalk, an exhausted Gavin simply let go of his mother's hand and confidently reached up toward Michael. "Can you please carry me? I am very tired," the small boy requested, with the absolute unquestioning trust that only innocent children possess, his heavy eyelids drooping lazily. Michael lifted the boy without a single second of hesitation, feeling the warm, comforting weight of the child securely resting against his broad chest, causing hot tears to prick the corners of his eyes as he held the boy close. Gavin sleepily buried his face into Michael's shoulder and softly murmured that Michael smelled exactly like his grandfather, a man who had passed away long before the boy was ever born. The profound weight of that innocent comparison settled deeply into Michael's soul, cementing his fierce dedication to this tiny, fragile family that had unexpectedly given his hollow life a beautiful, vibrant, new meaning. However, their growing happiness was suddenly shattered when at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, on a freezing Tuesday, Michael's cell phone violently shattered the dead silence of his dark bedroom, displaying Samantha's name brightly on the glowing screen. He answered immediately, his heart leaping into his throat, only to hear her sobbing uncontrollably, frantically explaining that Gavin was burning up with a terrifying fever of 104 degrees and was struggling violently to catch his breath. Michael ordered her to stay completely calm, threw on his clothes in record time, and drove his powerful truck across the empty neon-lit city streets, like a madman reaching her neighborhood in exactly 18 minutes. He rushed them straight to the emergency room at the nearest major hospital, boldly shouting for immediate medical assistance. The second he carried the gasping pale child through the sliding glass doors into the sterile lobby. A dedicated, highly experienced triage nurse named Maria rushed them instantly into a specialized trauma room, bypassing the crowded waiting area upon seeing the critical distress of the young toddler. A young pediatric doctor quickly arrived, assessing the child's labored breathing and dangerously high temperature, swiftly diagnosing a severe, rapidly advancing case of pediatric pneumonia, a terrifying word that completely devastated a weeping Samantha. Her knees buckled beneath her, but Michael was right there, firmly wrapping his strong, protective arms around the terrified mother, promising her with fierce, absolute certainty that he would not leave their side for a single second. The medical team sprang into action, inserting tiny IV lines and placing a small oxygen mask over Gavin's pale face, while Michael held Samantha close, absorbing her shaking sobs into his chest, fully cementing his role as their ultimate unwavering protector. The chaotic energy of the emergency room slowly faded into the background as they were transferred upstairs to a quiet pediatric ward, leaving them to face the terrifying uncertainty of the night together. The long, agonizing night stretched on endlessly, with Michael refusing to leave the deeply uncomfortable plastic chair stationed right beside the narrow hospital bed where the small boy slept fitfully under the glowing monitors. He gently insisted that Samantha try to sleep, wrapping his own warm jacket over her trembling shoulders, watching over both the woman he loved and the child he had come to view as his very own son. When the morning sun finally pierced through the beige hospital blinds, Gavin slowly fluttered his dark eyes open, looking confused and frightened by the unfamiliar wires and sterile white walls surrounding him. "Mommy?" the boy rasped weakly, and then his heavy gaze shifted slightly, his face instantly brightening with a tiny relieved smile when he saw Michael leaning over the metal bed rail. "You stayed," the boy whispered. The attending doctor returned shortly after, officially confirming the treatment plan and gravely informing them that Gavin would require at least 4 days of continuous hospitalization to fully clear the stubborn, dangerous lung infection. Michael immediately stepped out into the quiet hallway, using his phone to decisively cancel an entire week's worth of multi-million-dollar corporate negotiations, firmly telling David that he was dealing with an absolute family emergency. He spent the next 4 days bringing them hot, delicious meals from their favorite local restaurants, reading endless bedtime stories to Gavin, and sharing quiet, soul-bearing midnight conversations with Samantha while the hospital slept. It was during one of those quiet nights, as Gavin instinctively reached out in his sleep to firmly grasp Michael's large hand, that Michael experienced a profound, life-altering epiphany. Michael realizes that fatherhood is defined by love rather than biology, and quietly pays Gavin's enormous hospital bill without telling Samantha, protecting her dignity by claiming a charity covered the costs. Back home, he reveals the truth about his wealth, his painful past, and his deep love for both Samantha and Gavin, then asks Samantha to marry him. She joyfully accepts, and Gavin happily embraces Michael as his forever father. Soon afterward, they move into Michael's Coral Gables estate, where his thoughtful preparations for Gavin's dream bedroom and his decision to keep Samantha's cherished old dining table show that family means more to him than material wealth. 3 years later, Michael and Samantha have built a joyful life together, adopting a daughter named Lily, and creating a home filled with love, laughter, and security. Looking back, they realize that true prosperity comes not from money, but from compassion, trust, and the courage to care for others. Their journey proves that families are created through daily acts of devotion, rather than shared blood alone, and that simple kindness can heal old wounds, transform broken lives, and reveal that those we believe we are saving often become the ones who ultimately save us.